because it's pretty interesting. It's actually, the first time I really studied it. So he's been our county judge for 11 years now, which is a pretty good run. And but initially he started his public career as public service in '79, and for 8 years was a member of the Texas House of Representatives. And while he was there, he chaired the Committee on Energy and was a member of the Transportation Committee, and then he represented Texas in a number of national committees. In '89, so just after finishing that service, President George H.W. Bush, number 41, appointed him as the commissioner at the Interstate Commerce Commission. And so and he served there for 3 years. And so what's interesting is you start to see a lot of synergies around transportation, logistics, interstate commerce. There's this kind of recurring theme in his career, and it turns out that hurricane evacuation has a lot of similarities with moving cargo rapidly. The cargo just happens to be people, and there's a storm bearing down. As a county judge, he works with the 4 county commissioners. 3 of the precincts kind of all come together right here in the Lake Houston area, which is very interesting. And he is also the director of Harris County's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, which is a role of ever-increasing importance. Chairman of the Harris County Juvenile Board, and chairman of the Conference of Urban Counties Policy Committee. He went to Bel Air High School, graduated from Rice with a Bachelor in Economics and then a Master's from UT in Public Affairs. And he's received many numerous public awards and honors. But you may know him best for the work that he's done on the Astrodome, which is a great topic. He's so complex. He's also, what I've come to really respect about Judge Emmett is he brings a very level head, to some decisions and policies that often are very emotionally charged, sometimes politically charged. He's not afraid to break the mold, from the national political rhetoric to do what he thinks is right for Harris County, which I think is important to all of us living in Harris County. And, he champions some issues that are not, kind of headline grabbers like perhaps they should, which are, mental health, criminal justice reform, and even, looking at the future of the consolidated government between the city and the county, which is just another political lightning rod thrown out there. So I hope I'm giving you a lot of things to talk about, Judge Emmett. Please come up. It's a great honor to introduce you.
The one topic I was not going to talk about was the Astrodome. But since you brought it up, that has been the bane of my existence. It really has. I get more hate mail still about the dome than anything else. Not taxes, not flooding, not transportation, not crime, but the Astrodome. And it's just a building, And the mail I get is from people who say, if you don't tear it down, I'm never going to vote for you again. And sometimes they leave their phone number. Big mistake. As I call them, I say, okay, let me get this straight. Really? You care more about whether or not we tear down a building than you do about taxes or flooding or criminal justice or mental health. And inevitably, 90% of them say, well, I didn't think you were going to read that. Well, what did you send it to me for? But here's the deal on the Astrodome. I'm going to say it one more time. Hopefully. But see, today's a bad day anyway. You're off the hook because they're dedicating a historical marker out at the Dome. And that will just flare people up one more time. I keep going, would you just leave it alone, just get it rebuilt? Because the hoorah about the Dome, it's not about the building itself. It's about the stadium and the NRG Park complex. People don't realize it. No matter how many times I tell certain talk show hosts, they just refuse to get it. But I have no emotional attachment to that building. I really don't. Yeah, I grew up here and watched a lot of things there. But the reality is, the county signed a contract to maintain NRG Stadium in first-class condition relative to the stadium built 5 years before and 5 years after in the country. I wasn't here when that happened, didn't even live here. Good, bad, doesn't matter. So every time a stadium somewhere else in that, within those parameters, gets an upgrade, Mr. McNair and the rodeo come to the county and say, hey, you got to give us that same upgrade. And contractually, we have to do it. But it's also, we're not allowed to use property tax on the stadium. So what are we supposed to do? The dome is going to be the revenue generator that allows us to take care of the rest of that complex. And by building a new floor at ground level, that gives 9 acres of covered space, and 9 acres of covered space in Houston, Texas is rentable. And that's why the Texans and the rodeo are now full behind the idea. They didn't like the idea of converting it into something else, you know, elaborate. But as long as we're just building a new floor that can be rented out, and by the way, that gives 1,400 parking spaces underneath that also generate revenue, then everybody's happy. And then the upper reaches, we're going to turn over to a conservancy, a private group, because the reality is the dome is protected by the Texas Historical Commission. We couldn't tear it down if we wanted to. We can't even make changes to it without getting their permission. So, I've got to figure out how to say this so I don't get in trouble. I figured out that I and the 4 county commissioners and judges and commissioners in the future are not the most creative people in the world. And if we can turn it over to a lot of the more artsy, creative folks who also happen to have a lot of money, then they and all their friends can play with the Historical Commission, and they can do whiz-bang things with the upper reaches of the dome. All we really care about is the revenue that it's going to generate from the new floor and the parking. And that construction is going to start in October. So that's your dome update. Thank you very much. Harris County. You know, I've been out here, I don't know how many years in a row now, and I always have to remind people, Harris County is the 3rd largest county in the United States by population. We have more people now than 26 states. We are a big operation. And we have a serious problem. Actually, we have several serious problems, and we're at a tipping point. I'm going to get to Harvey in a minute, because Harvey is the thing that may have just pushed us right over that tipping point. The first problem we have, and this is not being critical of the city of Houston, it's just a reality. Back in 1963, when the city of Houston did strip annexations out all the highways, it put all of the county into the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the city, so that those areas could not incorporate, nor could cities like Humboldt and Tomball and Baytown encroach into that ETJ. And that was really a good idea, because that kept the core city of Houston from being ringed. And we've seen it in northern cities particularly, where they just atrophy. Once they get surrounded, all the wealth goes out, and all you're left with is the inner core. For whatever reason, some financial, some Voting Rights Act, some just pure politics, the city never annexed all those areas. And they picked up Kingwood, and they picked up Clear Lake, as council member well knows. But places like Aldine got left behind. And now we have a circumstance in Harris County to where 2.2 million people live inside the city of Houston. About 1.8 million people now live in unincorporated Harris County, where we're the government, unless you count the 1,000+ municipal utility districts and the various emergency districts. That is a serious problem, because county government in Texas is an arm of the state. We don't even have ordinance making power. Every holiday, people write me and call me and say, why don't you ban aerial fireworks? I have to explain, well, we can't. The only way we can is if I declare a drought emergency. And many of you have heard me talk, and someday I'll get in trouble for this. Basically, I look out and it hasn't rained in 48 hours, it's a drought. So I declare an emergency. Commissioners like that idea. Fireworks industry is even comfortable with it, and so we kind of cobble our way around that issue. But because we are now a city of 1.8 million people living in an unincorporated area county, but we don't have all the normal powers of a city, that's problem number one. Problem number two is how we are financed. We are financed by the most unpopular tax in the world, the property tax. I won't even ask you how many of you like the property tax. Nobody likes the property tax. I hate the property tax. But it's all the state has given us to work with. And now we have leaders at the state level who, every time they run for office, they say, elect us and we're going to lower the property tax. Well, that's a really nice thing to say, but the state doesn't even have a property tax. So what they're saying is we're going to lower the local property tax. And while the cities complain some about that, they at least get sales tax revenue. County doesn't get any sales tax revenue. We are totally beholden to the property tax. And yet we're growing. And recently, to give you an idea of how convoluted some things get, over the weekend, I guess, or maybe it was last week, it came out that the city of Houston growth has really slowed. And did anybody say anything about the county? Because the county growth was going way, way up. So a lot of those people that are moving here, generically, they're moving to Houston. They're just not living inside the city limits of Houston. It doesn't mean that Houston's not growing, because, as Ryan said, we're all in this together. But they're still moving here, and so it gave a false impression out to the world that, oh, this area is somehow going into decline. No, we're not. We're just going different, people are living in different places. And when the city of Houston sends trade missions all over the world to attract businesses, which is fine, most of them don't locate inside the city. They locate inside the county. And that's why I keep saying they really ought to be taking Jack Cagle with them, because most of them are locating out in his area where he's got to provide the roads. Now, you can say, well, that's just part of being county government. No, we're unique. We're the only county in the country like this. To give you an example, if you go to Dallas County and say, how many people live in unincorporated Dallas County? The answer is about 6,000. We have 1.8 million. And something's got to give. So here we are having to provide services. Well, what does the county do? The county, you get your tax, since I mentioned property tax, I'm going to talk about your tax bill. It comes in 4 buckets. One little tiny bucket is the Port of Houston. All it is, and it's a minimal amount, but every year, once Harris County Appraisal District, which, by the way, since we're talking about things that irritate me, the Harris County Appraisal District is not part of county government. But every time somebody gets their appraisal, who do they call? Me. I'm going, wait a minute, we don't have anything to do with that, but it says Harris County. I know it says Harris County, but that's the legislature's fault. We'll blame them anytime I get a chance, but I actually like the legislature being a former member. So every year when the appraisal district comes out with their final rolls, and all we do for the port is figure out what tax rate does it take to pay off the bonds that you voters have approved over the years. And like I said, it's minimal. A second bucket, though, is large. It's 17 cents on per 100, and that's over a quarter of your entire tax bill that you get from the county. Now understand the schools are different, and all the people who say we're going to lower your property taxes, they could lower your property taxes tomorrow if they would just have the state fund some of the schools. But they don't want to talk about that. It makes for better politics. So that second bucket, that's over a quarter of the part that you get from the county, is the Harris County Hospital District. What do we do there? We provide indigent health care. We don't have a choice. It's the right thing to do. We don't get to choose our customers. And I don't need to tell anybody in this room of people who run businesses that the cost of healthcare is beyond our control and totally unrelated to the consumer price index or any other measure of inflation. So that's the second bucket. The third bucket is general Harris County. It just says Harris County. 60% of that goes to criminal justice. The courts, the jail. The jail, by the way, is still the largest mental health facility in the state of Texas, which is fundamentally wrong, and we've got to change that. But if you ask me a question about mental health later, I'll get to that. I just don't have time to talk about it right now, but it is my passion. It's the one thing, if anybody remembered me for, I wanted to do mental health. So the jail and the courts, the constables, the sheriff, all that comes under criminal justice. Again, we don't get to pick our customers. And we enforce the laws that the state gives us to enforce. And we don't get to choose that. So we have very little control. So think about those first three buckets. And by the way, the other 40% is where the commissioners get their road building and parks and things like that. And our animal shelter comes into that, all those things. But so think about those first three. The port is small. We don't have any control over it. Indigent health care, same thing, no control. And then criminal justice, no control. That gets us to the fourth bucket, which nobody paid attention to. Because it was kind of, well, we've got this left, let's go spend it. And that's the Harris County Flood Control District. Well, guess what? People care a whole lot about the Harris County Flood Control District now. And they are rightly asking, well, why wasn't more money spent on flood control in the past? Well, the answer is, there was no political will to do it. The reality is, we had to do indigent health care, and not just me, this goes way back. We have to do the criminal justice part. Like I said, the port's a minor part. And so when you start talking about flood control, most people said, well, that's more of a Corps of Engineers. And so the county tried everything they could to maximize federal dollars. And so we have identified projects over the year, put about $120 million a year into flood control. And that obviously hadn't been enough. So here comes Harvey. What do we do now? Now's the tipping point. We either, as a community, capture the feelings that we had during and immediately after Harvey, where everybody said, we're all in this together, we're going to work, we're going to improve, we're going to make sure this doesn't happen again, or we're going to fall back into this, well, we don't want property taxes to go up. Now, how can we keep property taxes from going up and do this at the same time? If the county does it, we can't. That's as honest an answer as I can possibly give you. We have no other source of revenue. We cannot cut indigent health care. We cannot cut criminal justice. What are we supposed to do? And at the same time, though, federal government is saying, here's a tranche of money. I think it's $89 million is what they made available to the whole country. 89 billion, I'm sorry. How much of that do we get? We're not sure. But in order for us to be able to draw down that, we have to provide the local match. And some of those matches are 25%, some are 10%, some are 20%. But I'm going to ask again, how do we get our local match? The property tax. So if somebody really wanted to ensure that this magical place called Harris County and the city of Houston and the other cities, such as Humboldt, Mayor, I don't want to leave you out over there. We're going to have to fix this. And the only fix so far, last year during the special session of the Texas legislature, there was a bill introduced that said we are going to limit local property taxes to the growth of population plus inflation. And I said, I even went up and met with the Texas Public Policy Foundation to sit down and go, okay, I understand what you're trying to get to, But how are you going to measure population growth in Harris County? Are you going to measure it countywide? Because if you do that, what I just talked about at the beginning, the part in the unincorporated part, the part that we're mostly responsible for, is growing a whole lot faster than the county as a whole, so we will be punished under that system. Well, guess what? The state was introduced by Senator Craig Estes. Guess what they proposed? State population growth. Now that sounds great, but if the state grows 2%, Harris County has probably grown 20%, and unincorporated Harris County has probably grown 40%. And yet, when I called Senator Estes, he said, well, those are my orders. I can't change it. Folks, we're going to have to start saying enough. Because if they do that to us, we won't have the ability to meet our current needs, much less our future needs. So then let's talk about inflation. How do you measure inflation? Well, under that bill, it was going to be some index that was created, I think, by the LBB, or Legislative Budget Board, though I don't remember the details. But I can tell you the inflation index they were using had nothing to do with indigent health care, and nothing to do with the cost of criminal justice, and nothing to do with the cost of road building. There was going to be a general inflation index. If a bill like that passes, and my state of the county, before I start talking about Harvey, my state of the county is, come the next legislative session, if organizations like the Lake Houston Chamber do not get very serious and go to the legislators and say, if you vote for that, you are killing our community, then I don't know what we'll do. It is that dramatic. But yet, we've all seen the polls. If you take a poll and you say, I want to lower your property taxes. Yeah, everybody says, that's great. Now, there are solutions. Because I started by saying I hate the property tax. What's one solution? Allow unincorporated Harris County to share in the sales tax that currently goes to the state of Texas. For all intents and purposes, we're a city. We've got 1.8 million people. When the Super Bowl was played here, it was played in a county facility, but yet the county didn't get any revenue out of that. Because all that sales tax that was generated by people coming to our community and spending money, that all went to the city and to the state and to Metro. And a little bit about Harvey, if there's a silver lining. A lot of constructions occurred after Harvey. A lot of things have been bought. A lot of sales tax has been paid. Where'd that money go? To the state. And the state has this thing, I believe it's called a rainy day fund. And if Harvey wasn't a rainy day, then I don't know what is. So anybody at the state level that tells you, well, this upcoming bond election is going to be too big, they don't need that amount of money. I'll make them a deal. Dollar for dollar, anything the state gives us out of the rainy day fund, we'll take out of our bond. Just that simple. And the mayor was going to applaud for that too. Everybody will applaud. So that's the and I don't mean to be a downer here, I'm supposed to be uplifting, I know, but we've put up with this long enough. It's not, I know it's good politics to say, elect me and I'm going to lower your taxes. That's great. And I'm not saying we have to raise your taxes. I'm just saying we need to find a new way to finance an urban government like Harris County. You cannot make us live just with the property tax and expect us to continue to take care of the needs. And when I say us, Commissioner Cagle bears the brunt of it. I mean, he's got the most unincorporated part out here, and he's still got to do roads, and yeah, I guess you could not do any more parks, but you know, the constables and all the sheriff, all those people have to do their work, and that takes money. So let's talk about Harvey. And I was told I'm supposed to leave time for Q&A, and I always do what I'm told. Following the Tax Day and Memorial Day floods, we knew we had a problem. And we had already started working on, okay, what can we do to make our community more resilient? And then Hurricane Harvey formed, but then it went across the peninsula down in Mexico and dissipated. And then it wasn't a storm at all. And everybody heaved a sigh of relief. And then it reformed in the Gulf. And within 48 hours, it went from being a mere tropical storm to being a Category 4 hurricane. Fortunately, it went in south of us, so we heaved another sigh of relief. But then Jeff Lindner, how many of you know Jeff Lindner? He's become, when the New York Times, I think it was, said, move over Beyonce, Houston has a new diva in town. and they were talking about Jeff Lindner and his blue shirts. And by the way, he is every bit as grumpy in person as he appears on television. I go by and rub his head once in a while in the Emergency Operations Center, which, by the way, we do have the best Emergency Operations Center in the country. I know I say this every year. If the chamber has not taken a tour, you need to do that. And it is a phenomenal operation and started under my predecessor, and it's just been built and built and built. And it's a joint operation. That building, imagine this, Texas Department of Transportation, Harris County, City of Houston, Metro all cooperated on something. That was back in the day where you did those sorts of things. And it's a great facility. So Jeff Lindner started saying, well, the problem is that storm may stall out. And if it stalls, then we could be looking at a Tropical Storm Allison situation, which everybody remembered. And then about a day later, he came in and said, you know, we might get 20 inches of rain. And they're actually saying some places west of us could get as much as 50 inches of rain. Nobody's ever gotten 50 inches of rain in North America from one storm. Well, we all know how that turned out. It came and it sat over us. And some of the highlights are lowlights. I can tell you the first major decision I had to make, and this is serious, was whether or not to cancel the Coldplay concert in NRG Stadium on Friday night. Because everybody remembered the storm earlier when people came out of Toyota Center and they couldn't get home and tragedies occurred. So it was a serious consideration. And then it turned out we could have done it, but Coldplay canceled their own concert, so that made our life a little bit easier. But then the storm, because it had gone in down in Rockport, the state of Texas had sent all their equipment and resources there, as they should have. That's not critical of the state. But then all the highways were flooded, and nobody could get in to help us. We always have a couple of hundred shelter locations available. So we picked out 36 that we needed to open. There were problems with opening them. I won't go into all those gory details, but the Red Cross needs to do what the Red Cross can do, not what they think they can do. So we've changed all that format. But one of the highest moment was, you know, reaching out to the public and saying, if you have a boat, come help. Because the state couldn't get their assets here. And some people took that as being some kind of a brilliant thought on my part, and it wasn't. There's a recognition people were going to put their boats in the water whether I told them to or not, but it allows us to coordinate a little bit. And frankly, some of the professionals are always concerned when you have volunteers showing up to help, because frequently you end up needing to rescue the volunteers. But in this case, it actually worked out fairly well. There was a problem that we will correct in the future. There were so many people being dragged out of harm's way, including my youngest daughter and her family. They were taken out by boat. People forgot where they put them. So the next day, when we were trying to find ways to get them to shelters, well, where are they? Well, we don't know. We put them at some service station. So in the future, we're going to do little RFID chips, and every group, every boatload that's rescued, we're going to say, here, hold on to this chip. This way we can track you, we know where you are. But that whole effort was really one of the highlights. One of the lowlights was having to spend an inordinate amount of time on national television, along with the mayor, talking about why we didn't evacuate. And that was all caused by, again, somebody at another level of government saying, gee, we should evacuate. We should have evacuated Houston. Think about this. We didn't even consider it. I enjoyed, it was not the mayor's call, by the way, it's my call. I enjoyed watching him defend it on national television. Tell the mayor he did a good job. Because nobody wants to hear any of us say, well, that's not my job, that's some, you know, it doesn't work well. But the reality is, Harvey was not a hurricane, and that's my big fear this year. I'm afraid we are now entering hurricane season, and people are going to react to a potential hurricane with Harvey in mind. And that will be a disaster in the evacuation. In a hurricane, I never thought I'd say this, hurricanes are easy. You calculate the storm surge, you know which areas are going to be inundated, you evacuate those areas, you tell everybody else to stay put or hunker down, and it works. But I'm afraid now that people are flooded and they're going to go, oh my gosh, we don't want to go through that again. But hurricanes typically don't drop a lot of rain. Like Lockport didn't get a lot of rain. It's after they stall that the rain comes. So that's a concern. But if we had even considered evacuating Harris County, forget Galveston, Brazoria, that would mean on Wednesday before the storm hit on Saturday, I would have gone on television and said, we're going to shut down all businesses in Harris County and everybody has to leave. Nobody would have done that. I mean, it was a ludicrous suggestion for somebody to make. And so that was kind of the low light. But I will tell you that it was all put in perspective for me, and I still have trouble talking about this, so I apologize. You know, there were 6 nights that we were in the Emergency Operations Center. Nobody slept much. There were so many tales of people there that one deputy constable on Friday looked up and I walked by him and he's looking at the screen and there's 2 tornadoes that are tracking on parallel paths out in northwest Harris County. And I said, oh, tornadoes, really? He goes, yeah, that's my house. And he went back to work. You know, those are the stories you just can't get over. Or there were numerous people in our Emergency Operations Center whose homes were flooded, their families were evacuated, their dogs were missing. Believe it or not, yes, dogs missing caused great concern. But they just kept working, and I can't say enough about them. But after the storm had finally passed, and my daughter was back at her house, and there was a church that had collected all kinds of new shoes to send to Africa. And somehow she knew about it. So she contacted the church and they agreed to bring those shoes over to her neighborhood in Brays Heights and set up on folding tables. Because not only the people there needed them, but all the folks that just showed up to help muck out houses. And so the only time I lost it during the whole event, really, was after I'd gone home, after 6 nights, I'd showered, and she wanted me to come over and, you know, say hi to the people that were helping. And when I turned on that street, because all you could see were just debris piles. And what we all have to remember is that's not debris. Those were people's lives, all out there on the street. So, now that we're almost a year away, what have we done about it? The truth is very little. We've planned a lot. We've talked a lot. Congress has passed an appropriations bill. The state says they're going to help come next legislative session, and you know, there are a lot of changes, and I will give a shout out to Dan Huberty, because, you know, the whole San Jacinto River Authority, Lake Conroe, I probably shouldn't say this, but I think one of the reasons he decided to run again was that. I'm not sure he was going to run again. I'm not supposed to say that, but he wants to make sure that gets fixed. And that's the attitude we're going to have. And it's going to cost some money. We can't get over that fact. So Harris County waited and waited and waited, and then finally we said, okay, how much will it take to make our community resilient? And if you added all of them, and this is beyond the realm of reason, I understand, but we come up to about $30 to $35 billion worth of projects that would need to be done. Now that includes federal dollars, anybody. So that's way too much money. But for us to really make a dent, it's going to take something in the neighborhood of $2.5 billion. Now, 700 to 900 million of that is automatic. I mean, we've defined that. That's a match for federal dollars that we can identify. And most of those are going to be at least 3 to 1. So we can capture those back. But there are a lot of watersheds that don't qualify. One that comes to mind is Cypress Creek, which for years and years and years, everybody worried about Cypress Creek only as it overflows into Addicks and Barker. But in fact, now we have hundreds of thousands of people living along Cypress Creek. So we've got to do something there. The San Jacinto River really hadn't been on anybody's priority. And I will tell you what's happened there so far. We did get a call from the state saying, would the Harris County Flood Control District take on the desilting of the San Jacinto River, West Fork mainly, but East Fork also needs to be dealt with. And we were ready to do that, but then the Corps of Engineers stepped in and said, no, we want to do that. Now, we want all the help we can get. We can do it faster than they can. It's just the reality. We don't have to go through quite the same process. We are also dealing with, and if he's in the room, I apologize, but you know, one gentleman said, nope, you should not desilt the San Jacinto River. Kingwood just gets to flood again. I don't think anybody here is willing to accept that as a solution. And the problem Harvey's now created with the river, been brought to my attention very clearly. The river is in a lot worse shape now than it was pre-Harvey. So now a much lesser rain inundates the same number of homes. So we've got to deal with this. And so Commissioner's Court selected a date of August 25th for a bond election. Why? It wasn't anything political. Some people tried to read a whole lot into it. I just want people to focus on this issue. Because if it's on the November ballot, think about this. We still have straight ticket voting in Texas. A lot of people go in, they vote Democrat, they vote Republican, they leave. Well, in that case, they don't vote on the bond. It's down at the bottom. I want everybody that comes to vote in August to be voting for or against that bond. I've promised not to dare people to be against it anymore. My commissioner said that's not a good thing to say. But it would be too easy in November when everybody's running. Think about all the races. You just went through a congressional runoff. I don't need to tell you all the ads and all the stuff you're going to get in your mailbox. I wanted people to focus because this is the tipping point. Even though we have an urban governance problem, we've got a revenue problem, we have a perception problem. And that problem is we cannot be seen around the world as a flood-prone area that floods, every year. And think about it, we've been doing that. Memorial Day, Tax Day, and then Harvey. We cannot pretend it won't happen again. Other people can argue about what's causing it. But all I know is we've got to make our community resilient, and so this bond is going to be the first step. We have not decided what's in the bond, because that's something the public needs to help us with. Already, there's a group in Austin, who some people know well, called Empower Texans, who are saying, I can't believe they're asking for money and they're not telling us what they're going to do with it. Well, we're going to tell you exactly what we're going to do with it. And the reason we're going to do that But the way we're going to do that is we're going to come have meetings with any group that wants to meet anytime and talk about it. Because like I said, we could have $30 billion worth of projects. We can't do that, but we have to prioritize. And that's not going to be my job. It's not going to be county commissioner's job. It's not going to be Harris County Flood Control District job. It's going to be all of our jobs together. We've got to go back and we've got to capture that feeling that we had during and immediately after Harvey and say, we're in this together and we're going to solve it. So that's the message you're going to hear from me over and over and over between August 25th. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
I'll start. I'm David Fail. I live in Tascasita. Been there 40 years. Never flooded before until Harvey. Here we go. So, two questions. Number one is, what do you think about the funding, matching suggestion that the governor has suggested come from the federal grant? Number two question is, what happened to the drainage fee that was allocated in 2012? Where is that money going, especially for the short-term needs? We got short, medium, and long-term problems we've got to solve, and we got a hurricane season coming up on us.
You asked two perfect questions, and here's why. Because we're all going to have to educate ourselves in this process. The drainage fee is a City of Houston drainage fee. It has absolutely nothing to do with Harris County. So, not to put him, but give it.
And I know that, yeah.
Okay, so that's something the city's going to have to answer. But our Harris County Flood Control, we're responsible for the major waterways and the major channels. And so we've got to deal with that. The city, and there are some cases where the bio or the major waterway backed up and it causes the city to flood. There are other cases where we have capacity and the city drainage system can't get it in. But that drainage fee has a beneficial effect for us because I hear that all the time, which is exactly why we're going to go out. And by August the 1st, we will show you an exact list of here are the projects that this money is going to go to. So it's not going to be administrative. There's not going to be any questions about it. And that's why we're doing that. Your first question, I'm going to try and be nice. If the federal government gives us, I'll make up a number, $100 million for flood control projects, and then we're told by the state, use that $100 million for your local match to pull down the other 300, then we end up only having 300. Whereas if we make the local match, then we end up with 400. It makes no sense to take federal dollars to pull down other federal dollars. It's a waste of money. And I'm going to say it one more time. If the state really wanted to help the local property taxpayers, they could give us that $100 million out of that rainy day fund and we'd all be happy. And that's what other states have done. So I don't know what the reluctance is. I'm hoping that when the legislature meets in January, they're going to take that into consideration. But we can't wait. So we've got to know going now. And like I said, if the state comes up with money later on, we can take it dollar for dollar. Understand if you pass a bond, it doesn't mean you have to issue that bond. And so if the state came up and said, hey, we'll give you $2.5 billion, and we'll go, okay, fine, then we're done. Is that? Yes, sir.
Judge Mark Mitchell with Lake Houston Economic Development. You mentioned the fact that Harris County offered to do desiltation for both east and west, but the Army Corps came forward and said, no, we want to do that.
Right.
Given the timing that we've got as far as coming into hurricane season, and the comment you mentioned about we're in worse shape now than before the disaster, is that open for negotiation, or is
I don't think so.
the goalpost has been moved a couple of times already?
I don't think that's open for negotiation. Russ Poppy, our guy in charge of flood control, was in the meeting, and the colonel from the Corps, it wasn't even from Galveston, it was from the Dallas regional office. said, no, they want to do it, so they're going to do it. Now, my worry, you understand I have a certain personal, many of you know this, you know, I lived in Bear Branch for a long time when I was in the legislature, and we used to, don't take this wrong, we would chuckle every time we'd hear on the television or radio that Kingwood had flooded, because we knew it really wasn't Kingwood, it was Forest Cove. We have friends who lived in it. This time it was Kingwood. This time it was Atascocita, as you said. You know, people who lived here for 40 years never flooded. Part of that was the San Jacinto River Authority, I know, but and I think that needs to be corrected. You know, that lake, I know it's a water supply lake, and I know people don't like for their docks to be sticking up out of the water, but if it's a safety issue, I think we need to deal with safety first. Looking out over, you know, I'm told that Lake Houston has about half the capacity it had when it was built. We've got to. One more just sort of side note, and then I'll take one more question about education. We're all learning, and I've had a lot of people say, well, Addicks and Barker, you should have let the water out of those before Harvey came. Everybody know how much water is in Addicks and Barker? None. They're dry as a bone until we get rain. And people don't know that. And so a lot of education is going to have to occur as we go through. The other thing, everybody's going to have their own interest. I understand that. You know, people up here are going to be looking at the San Jacinto River in Lake Houston. People along Cypress Creek are going to be looking at what we're going to do in Cypress Creek. And folks downstream from Addicks and Barker, you know, I could go all the way around the county. What we have decided, and we have said over and over and over, the federal government, and this is another issue why we have to have the bond that we do, federal government has a cost-benefit analysis that they put on a lot of their funding. And what it means is, so that the federal government, the flood control programs don't have to keep buying out the same properties or repairing the same properties. The more valuable the property, then the better the cost benefit, and that's where the money flows. Well, that's just wrong. I'm sorry. There are people who live in parts of town that the property may not be worth as much as somebody in Memorial, but it's still their home. So what the county's going to do is we're going to put our money where it solves the most problems for people. We're going to try and move the most people out of harm's way, and other people can worry about the cost benefit. So, is there time for one more? Yes. Where? Yes.
And I realize this is a multi-pronged thing to try to do a regional plan, but the very first time we had the flood after 99 was open, I believe there was legislation, and I think that Representative Bell brought it, that would, for future growth and development, that the developers, sorry, important, was going to need to be involved in the growth and have some accountability and some
Absolutely.
gain. And where is that?
Absolutely. And we have to be willing to admit that the rules and regulations we had in place pre-Harvey weren't correct. You know, we got to say that. If we had had the right detention requirements and we'd had the right rules and regulations, we wouldn't have had as much flooding. But nobody saw it coming. And the other situation we have, and this is the most important thing that we've got to do, we don't know where the real floodplains are. It's great for the county or the city to say, here are the rules for the 500-year floodplain, but we've now had 3 500-year floods in a 2-year period. I don't think our definition of a 500-year flood is correct. Otherwise, we're maybe safe for 1,500 years, but so all of us, and I will say at the county level, we've had really a good reaction from the development community. We haven't had much controversy. Everybody wants to make this right. And so our building codes, our building requirements, our detention requirements, that we need to look at all those. But before we can really do that, either FEMA or somebody, and this is a part of what we want to spend our money on, we've got to map where the tributaries are. Give you the quick example, I know I'm running over on time, but I apologize. When Allison came and flooded the Texas Medical Center at Rice University, everybody went, that never happened before. Why did that happen? Well, if you went back and looked, before they were built, there was a creek that ran right through there. And Mother Nature has a long memory. So when the waters got high enough, it went back to its natural water course. Well, between, and of course out here, I don't need to tell you, we've built all over the place. Does everybody remember where all the creeks and tributaries were? No. But the best example is when Addicks and Barker were built 20 miles outside of town, nobody was ever going to live there. And now we've built all the way up to them, and in fact, in some cases behind them, and I'll be the first to admit building behind a dam is not a real smart thing to do. You just think about it. But as that development occurred, nobody mapped exactly where the creeks and the tributaries were. We got to go back and do that. Otherwise, our floodplain maps are absolutely meaningless. And flood insurance, the best advice I can give right now is everybody buy flood insurance, because we don't know where those floodplains are. And we're going to have to do that. So let me end with this. Harvey, like I said, was a wake-up call for all of us. It is job one. It is the one thing we all have to pay attention to. I agree with those who say, well, we shouldn't build for a Harvey because that was extreme. I agree. But we had Memorial Day and we had Tax Day, and we're still I think, going to have 15, 20, 25-inch rains, maybe not 50. So we may as well get ready for it. We may as well look at that as the cost of doing business. I wish the county had a different way of paying for it other than property tax, in case that hadn't come across today. And hopefully we'll be able to get beyond this sort of irrational, we're just going to lower the property tax no matter what. Because you can't do that. You cannot do that and maintain the society that we have. So thank you all very much.
Judge, we have a gift for you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. All right. Well, that was fantastic. So we very much appreciate Judge being here today, and of course, Concord Development. So let's thank our sponsors once again. Let me make sure I'm on the right page. Yep, that's where I'm supposed to be. Our presenting sponsors, Concord Development. Thank you, Ryan McCord. Our gold sponsor, Lone Star College System, thank you so much. Also gold sponsor, Jack Cagle, Commissioner of Precinct 4. Silver sponsor, Batteries and Bulbs Humble. And with that, you are dismissed. Thank you.